There's a town in the mountains of Pennsylvania where the forest has swallowed the streets. The church still stands. The road is cracked and split straight down the middle. And if you crouch low on a cold morning, you can watch smoke curl up through the seams in the asphalt. It rises out of the ground like the earth itself is breathing. Because underneath that town, a fire has been burning since 1962. It has burned longer than most of the people watching this have been alive. And geologists say it could keep on burning for another 250 years. That's the thing nobody tells you about America's empty places. Some of them are breathtaking. We went looking for the most beautiful abandoned towns in the country, expecting the usual sad stories, and what we found kept stopping us cold. Not ruins from some old war, not the tired tale about the factory closing and everyone drifting away to the city. These places empty for reasons that are stranger and far darker than that. And every single one of them is sitting right there in the public record, in EPA files and court documents and old newspaper archives that anyone can read. A quick, honest note before we begin. This is not a list of places you should go and visit. Several of them are genuinely dangerous, and some are sealed off from the public entirely. This is a documentary about why they emptied, not a travel guide. The one that will truly unsettle you is number 3. But we start somewhere quieter, out on the open plains. Number 11, Treece, Kansas. On a summer afternoon out here, the tall prairie grass leans and ripples in the wind, and pale gray hills rise on the horizon like desert dunes, soft and rounded and almost lovely in the low golden light. Meadowlarks call from the fence posts. The sky goes on forever in every direction. And then you get close to those beautiful hills, and something starts to feel wrong. They're too gray, too fine, too smooth. And you slowly realize they aren't hills at all. They're waste. Man-made mountains of crushed rock left behind by a full century of lead and zinc mining. And they are laced all the way through with heavy metals. Here's the part that gets us. Treece was once the very same town as Picher, Oklahoma, right across the border. Before a survey crew drew the state line more than 100 years ago, they were a single community sitting on the exact same poison ground. But when the government buyouts finally came, Picher got rescued first. For years, the people of Treece were left waiting, watching their twin get bought out and cleared away just across an invisible line on a map, while they kept breathing the very same dust. According to the EPA, decades of mining had left the groundwater contaminated and the land pocked with sinkholes where the old tunnels were quietly caving in far below their feet. Eventually, the buyout reached them too, and by 2012, Treece was officially disincorporated and most of its buildings were torn down. The population had been 138. It fell to almost nobody at all. One stubborn holdout stayed on in the silence, refusing to leave the only home he had ever known, and he passed away a few years later. Now the prairie grass grows up through the empty foundations, and the meadowlarks have the whole place to themselves. And believe it or not, this was the gentlest story on our entire list. Number 10. Gilman, Colorado. Picture a ghost town clinging to the very lip of a cliff, more than 600 feet straight up above a rushing river with snow-dusted peaks ringing the whole valley. It sits at nearly 9,000 feet of elevation, and it is only a short drive from the world-famous ski runs of Vail. From the highway down below, you can look up and see the old wooden miners' houses and the weathered mine buildings hanging right out over the edge of that drop, frozen exactly as they were left, gorgeous in the thin mountain light and completely forbidden. People pay a small fortune to vacation just minutes from this spot. Nobody at all is allowed to set foot in Gilman. The town was built back in the 1880s to serve the Eagle Mine, which pulled gold, silver, zinc, and lead out of the mountain for roughly 100 years. Then in 1984, the mine shut down for good, and the underground workings were simply allowed to flood with water. That is the moment everything changed. According to Colorado's health department, that flooded mine and its enormous waste piles began leaching lead, zinc, cadmium, and arsenic straight down toward the Eagle River below. There were around 8 million tons of mine waste sitting up there. The EPA declared it a Superfund site in 1986, and the town was condemned and sealed off from the world. And there's one small, sad detail we just can't shake. Gilman's post office opened in 1886 and closed in 1986, its life exactly a century long, almost to the very month. Now the town just watches the traffic pass far below, beautiful and toxic, all at once. A perfect postcard that nobody is permitted to enter. But at least Gilman is still standing on solid rock. The next place is losing the ground itself. Number 9. Newtok, Alaska. Out on the far edge of the Bering Sea, the tundra glows green and gold in the endless summer light, threaded with silver rivers that catch and hold the sun. For more than 2,000 years, the Yupik people have lived on this coast, hunting and fishing and gathering exactly as their ancestors did long before them. It is one of the most remote and genuinely beautiful corners of this entire country, and it is falling into the water one house length at a time. The Ninglik River is devouring the land. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers estimated the shoreline was eroding at a rate of 70 to 90 feet every single year. Stop and really picture that for a second. A full length of a house's worth of solid ground, gone every year, and it never comes back. And underneath the village itself, the permafrost that held everything firm for thousands of years is thawing out, so the houses tilt and sag and sink. The fuel tanks lean over at frightening angles, and the community's well water turned salty and undrinkable. This is the disturbing part, and it isn't a mystery to anybody. Scientists and the state of Alaska link the thaw and the erosion directly to a warming climate. Newtok became one of the very first American communities forced to pull up its roots and move because of it. The residents voted, painfully, to relocate to a brand new village called Mertarvik, 9 miles across the water on higher, firmer ground. About a third of them made the move back in 2019. The last 71 people carried whatever they could and left in 2024. Now, Newtok sits abandoned, its empty houses slowly sliding into the same river that raised generations of families. They didn't leave because they wanted a change. They left because there was simply no more ground left to stand on. Number 8. Cheshire, Ohio. A little riverside village on the banks of the Ohio, about 140 years old, the kind of place with brick homes and porch swings and neighbors who had known one another their whole lives. By every right in the world, it should still be there today. It isn't, and the reason is almost hard to say out loud. Right beside the town stood the General James M. Gavin Power Plant, an enormous coal facility with smokestacks rising some 800 feet into the sky. When the plant installed new equipment meant to clean up its emissions, something went wrong with the chemistry inside. The result was a strange bluish haze that would drift down and settle over the town, a fine mist of sulfuric acid. It burned people's throats when they breathed it in. It ate at the paint on their parked cars. So in 2002, according to reporting from The Time, American Electric Power sat down, ran the numbers, and decided it was cheaper to buy the entire town than to keep on fixing the air. They paid around $20 million for roughly 200 properties, essentially every single lot in the village. But the real story was buried down in the paperwork. Residents who accepted the money had to sign away their right to ever sue the company over future health problems. Nearly everyone signed. The elderly and the sick were quietly allowed to remain in their homes until they died. Just sit with that arrangement for a second. A corporation bought an entire living town, roots and history and all, simply to make one inconvenient problem quietly disappear. Today, Cheshire is a scatter of empty houses standing in the permanent shadow of those smokestacks. That's a town emptied on purpose. For money. The next one was sealed off for something else entirely. For what happened inside it. Number 7. North Brother Island, New York. This might just be the eeriest place we found on the whole search, and the wild part is that it's hiding in plain sight. It's a 20-acre island sitting right in the East River, close enough to clearly see the Manhattan skyline, close enough that jets descending into LaGuardia Airport pass directly overhead. And today, it is a forest. A real, wild, overgrown forest with thick ivy pouring over broken windows and full-grown trees pushing up through the floors of an abandoned hospital. Almost no living person is allowed to go there. Not every empty place was poisoned. Some were shut away for their history alone. Beginning in the 1880s, this little island held Riverside Hospital, a quarantine station for people carrying smallpox, tuberculosis, and typhoid fever. It is the place where Mary Mallon, the woman history remembers as Typhoid Mary, was confined against her will for the last 23 years of her life, staring out at the city she could never return to across the water. It is also where survivors were brought after the 1904 General Slocum Steamboat fire, when over 1,000 people, mostly women and children, on a church outing, died in the river. One of the deadliest single days in the city's history until September 11th. Later, the island became a treatment center for troubled teenagers, which finally closed in 1963 amid allegations of serious misconduct. Since that year, no one at all has lived there. The city quietly turned it into a bird sanctuary, and now black-crowned night herons nest in the crumbling wards where the sick once waited to get better or to die. It sits there in the middle of the busiest city in America, forgotten by nearly everyone, forbidden to all, disappearing a little more under the leaves with every passing season. If you're finding these as fascinating and unsettling as we did digging them up, a quick like genuinely helps more curious people find this video. We go looking for forgotten places and the real documented stories behind them all the time. Now, let's get into the ones that are truly hard to shake. Number 6. Times Beach, Missouri. Picture a summer resort town sitting on a lazy river. First laid out in the 1920s, a little getaway where families from St. Louis came to swim and picnic and escape the city heat. Green cottonwood trees, quiet gravel streets, the Merrimack River drifting slowly past the back porches. Today, that same ground is a peaceful state park along historic Route 66. People walk their dogs there and stop to photograph the old road, and almost none of them have any idea that an entire town was scrubbed off that exact spot for one of the strangest environmental disasters this country has ever seen. Here is what actually happened. Times Beach couldn't afford to pave its dusty dirt roads, so all through the early 1970s, the town hired a contractor to spray them down with waste oil, just to keep the dust from choking the air. It seemed practical. It seemed completely harmless. But the oil that man was spraying had been mixed with chemical waste, and it carried dioxin, one of the most toxic substances ever created, a byproduct tied to the manufacture of Agent Orange. The very first warning sign was the animals. Horses and other livestock near the sprayed areas began sickening and dying, and birds dropped right out of the sky. Then, according to CDC and EPA records, soil testing found dioxin at levels roughly 100 times higher than what was considered safe at the time. In 1982 and 1983, the government told every resident to leave and bought the whole town out with around $33 million in federal funds, relocating more than 2,000 people. Now, to be fair and honest with you, this one comes with a genuine debate attached. Years afterward, some scientists argued the danger had been overstated and that the mass evacuation may have gone further than it needed to. Others pointed to later studies linking dioxin to real long-term harm. What no one disputes is the bitter irony sitting at the heart of it. A town paid good money to protect its own streets from a little dust, and that very decision is what wiped it clean off the map forever. Number 5. Bombay Beach and the Salton Sea, California. Back in the 1950s and 60s, this was paradise, and that's no exaggeration. A vast, shimmering blue lake spread out in the middle of the desert, the largest lake in all of California, bigger across than Lake Tahoe. There were yacht clubs and marinas packed with boats. Celebrities came out to water ski on the weekends. Bright postcards called it the miracle in the desert, and families lined up to buy lots along the shore. Today, you can walk that very same beach, and it's carpeted with the bleached white bones of dead fish, half-sunk boats rusting in the shallows, and the collapsing skeletons of old motels. And honestly, it is stunningly, hauntingly beautiful in a way that stops your breath. Artists make pilgrimages out here just to photograph it. The sunsets burning over those ruins look like the actual end of the world. But that eerie beauty is exactly the problem. The Salton Sea is drying up and shrinking back because the water that once fed it has been steadily diverted away to the coastal cities, and as the lake retreats, it exposes more and more of the old lake bed. Decades of agricultural runoff and metals baked hard into the dust. When the desert wind kicks up, that dust lifts high into the air. This is the disturbing part, and it is happening right now, not in some closed chapter of history. The communities ringing the sea, according to public health data, suffer some of the highest childhood asthma rates in the entire state. A study out of USC and UC Irvine tracked around 700 local children and found the blowing dust was actually stunting the growth of their lungs, with effects worse than what researchers measure near busy freeways. A place that was built as a playground is now quietly poisoning its own children, one breath at a time. And that one truly hurts, because there are still families living out there today breathing it in every single day, with a lake that is now nearly twice as salty as the ocean. The next town chose the exact opposite fate. It made itself vanish completely, on purpose. Number 4. Uravan, Colorado. Deep in the Red Rock Canyons of western Colorado, along the banks of the San Miguel River, there's a place where the towering sandstone walls glow a deep, burning orange at sunset, and the water runs clear and cold over the stones. It's the kind of view that makes you pull the car right over, just to stand and breathe it in. There's a quiet little picnic area there now, and there is absolutely nothing, not a sign, not a foundation, not a single wall, to tell you that a town of about 1,000 people once lived and worked and raised their families on that exact ground, because it's gone, not abandoned, not ruined, erased. The town's name comes straight from what they pulled out of these canyons, uranium and vanadium. And the wow fact here is almost too strange to be real. The legendary scientist Marie Curie herself once sent all the way to this remote spot in Colorado for a precious gram of radium. Decades later, the uranium mined from these same red cliffs helped fuel the Manhattan Project and the nuclear weapons of the Cold War. But all those years of processing radioactive ore left the entire site soaked through with radioactive contamination and heavy metals. In 1986, the EPA declared Uravan a Superfund site, officially too toxic for human beings. And the order that came down was staggering to even imagine. The mining company was told to take the entire town apart, piece by piece. As one former resident described it, every single house, every tree, every last board and brick was dug up, shredded, and buried in a giant pit on top of a nearby hill. Some of the men who spent their whole working lives in those mills later spoke openly of the cancer that followed them home, of losing half a lung, of living out their final years hooked to oxygen tanks, saying quietly that they never knew it could hurt them. And yet, to this very day, Former residents still gather once every single year for a picnic on that empty green field where their childhood town used to stand. They come back to eat and to remember, sitting on a place that had to be erased from the face of the earth to keep it from harming whoever might have lived there next. Number 3. Picher, Oklahoma. This is the one we honestly can't stop thinking about. From a distance, Picher has that same strange, pale beauty as Treece, those enormous chat piles catching the afternoon light like desert mesas rising up over the plain. But Picher was far bigger. And what happened here is so much worse. This was once the single richest lead and zinc mining field on the entire planet. The ore dug out of this ground supplied the bullets for 2 world wars. And in the end, it destroyed the town from the inside out, starting with the children. The chat, that endless mountain of crushed mining waste, was absolutely everywhere in Picher, piled up higher than the buildings themselves. And for years, nobody understood that it was completely saturated with lead. So the kids played on it. They rode their bikes up and down those gray slopes and sledded down them for fun in the winter. Parents scooped up the fine gray gravel to fill their children's sandboxes with it. Then the blood tests started coming back, and the results were an absolute nightmare. According to surveys reported through the Tar Creek Superfund program, at 1.63% of the children in Picher had lead poisoning. 63%. That's lead that can quietly and permanently damage a growing child's brain. On top of all of that, the ground itself was collapsing into the vast honeycomb of abandoned mine tunnels underneath, so sinkholes could open up without any warning at all. And Tar Creek itself ran a rusty, acidic orange. The government began buying people out and moving them to safety. And then, on May 10th, 2008, as if this poisoned town had not already suffered enough, a violent EF4 tornado tore directly through the middle of it, killing at least 6 people and flattening entire blocks of homes. For most of the last holdouts, that was the final blow. The buyouts were completed, and in 2009, Picher was officially dissolved as a town. Fewer than 10 people remain there today. A community that helped arm an entire nation ended up poisoning its own kids to do it. Number 2. Love Canal, New York. On the surface, it was the picture of the American dream itself. A neat, tidy neighborhood near Niagara Falls, modest houses with green front lawns, a brand new elementary school, kids pedaling their bikes down the sidewalks, young families who truly believed they had finally found somewhere safe and affordable to raise them. And that ordinary, hopeful little street was built directly on top of a grave. Here's the wow fact, and it still genuinely stuns us every time we say it out loud. From the 1940s into the 1950s, a chemical company buried more than 21,000 tons of toxic industrial waste in an old abandoned canal on that site. Then, according to EPA records, the company sold that covered-over chemical dump to the local school board for $1 single, along with a note carefully washing its hands of any future responsibility. And the board went ahead and built an elementary school right on top of it. Homes filled in all around the site. For years, families noticed strange chemical smells, black sludge oozing up into their basements, unexplained illnesses, cancers, and heartbreaking rates of miscarriage and birth defects. Then, in 1978, a local mother named Lois Gibbs connected the dots between her son's school and the buried waste beneath it, and she flatly refused to be brushed aside. The story exploded across national television. President Jimmy Carter declared a federal emergency, and roughly 900 families were evacuated from their homes. Love Canal became the disaster that finally shocked America awake. It is the direct reason the Superfund law exists at all, and the company eventually paid out well over $100 million in settlements. But all of that came far too late for the families who had already raised their children on poisoned ground, trusting the whole time that surely someone would have warned them if it wasn't safe. Which brings us all the way back to where we first started. Number 1. Centralia, Pennsylvania. We opened on it, and now you know enough to really see it for exactly what it is. Once this was a thriving coal town of well over 1,000 people, tucked into the folds of the Appalachian Hills, wrapped in forest that turns brilliant gold every single autumn. Now that forest has quietly taken the streets back. You could walk the main road from one end to the other and never see another living soul. Just cracked, buckled pavement, the wind moving through the trees, and thin ribbons of smoke rising up out of the ground. In 1962, a fire is believed to have started in a town landfill and then slipped down into the maze of abandoned coal mines beneath the streets. It caught the coal seams themselves, and it simply never stopped. That blaze has now been burning underground for over 60 years, at depths reaching 300 feet, and at its current rate, experts say the fire could keep on burning for another 250 years. It fed on a danger the town couldn't even see. Toxic gases seeped up through the soil, invisible and deadly. There was a chilling warning sign in 1979 when a local gas station owner lowered a thermometer down into his underground fuel tank and found the gasoline had already reached 172 degrees. Then, in 1981, a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski was standing in a backyard when the earth simply opened up beneath his feet, a sinkhole 150 feet deep. He'd barely caught hold of a tree root and clung to it, choking on the fumes, until his cousin managed to drag him out. The steam pouring from that hole carried lethal levels of carbon monoxide. That was the moment the danger became undeniable to everyone. The government spent tens of millions of dollars relocating almost the entire town. The state condemned the buildings one by one. And in 2002, the Postal Service did something you almost never hear of. It revoked the town's zip code, number 17927. Centralia was struck clean off the map while still on fire beneath the ground. A small handful of holdouts were granted the right to live out their natural lives there, above a fire that will outlast every single one of us. So what do we actually take away from all of this? Because it would be so easy to file these stories away as spooky little bits of trivia. And they are so much more than that. Look back over the whole list one more time and you start to notice something that is genuinely hard to sit with. Almost none of these places simply died of neglect. They were beautiful. They were loved. People built entire lives there, raised their kids there, and fully expected to grow old and be buried there. And what emptied them, in nearly every single case, wasn't nature turning cruel all on its own. It was something we did or something we saw coming and just couldn't stop in time. The waste we buried and then forgot about. The dust we stirred up and breathed in. The fire we could never manage to put out. That is the quiet, uncomfortable truth sitting underneath all of the awe and the eerie beauty. A gorgeous view will not protect you from what's in the soil or the water or the very air you are breathing. Some of the most stunning corners of America are the ones we can never go back to. And here's the part that really lands hardest. They became that way within living memory. Not centuries ago in some distant, faded past. In our own lifetimes, to people who were just like us, if these stories stayed with you the way they've stayed with us, do us a favor and share this with someone who would want to see it. And go ahead and subscribe, because we go looking for these forgotten places and the real stories behind them every week. These towns never got the chance to say goodbye. The very least that we can do is remember that they were here and that people once called them home.